Our speaker is not just an author, a writer, she's actually also a singer, a songwriter, and a poet. She is the founder and president of the Muslims for Progressive Values, which advocates for freedom of expression and conscience, for freedom of expression and human rights for all through an inclusive interpretation of Islam. She advocates these values through public education, advocacy, and the arts. You'll get to hear a little bit of her creative side through a song right at the end that she's written. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Multi-Faith Advisory Council to the United Nations, and is also a board member of the Community Partners Foundations in Los Angeles. She is an officiant. She has pioneered Muslims for Progressive Values Islamic interfaith marriage services and has officiated hundreds of interfaith marriages in the US since 2006. She is the subject of an award-winning documentary titled Al-Imam, which I encourage you to see as well. It was screened at the Cannes Film Festival in 2019. And she's also a Grammy-certified songwriter. She utilizes the power of music against hate and in creating this new American Muslim culture. Ani's memoir that some of you might have and some of you can get from Garbo's Pyramid Bookshop and Gallery is called The Unlikely Social Justice Warrior, Making My Life Count as a Muslim Feminist. This was published by Lived Places Publishing in July 2025, so it's a very relevant and current book. She was born in Malaysia. She's a Muslim since birth, spent a good portion of her formative years raised in Germany, Egypt, and India as the ambassador's daughter. Her exposure to different politics, religions, and cultures has really shaped her inclusive approach and worldview. So please join me in welcoming Ani Zonneveld.
Thank you, Abby. Are we going to do the witness first?
Yes. So here we go. So John is going to play a short film. It's about 16 minutes. When I first watched it about a month ago, it had a very strong personal effect for me, but I think everybody, even outside the Islamic faith or the LGBTQ community, can really relate to some of the aspects of the value of human life, all life, in this movie. So John will go ahead and play this movie for 16 minutes, and then we'll have a very short session of questions with myself and Ani, and then we'll open up to the audiences, and then there'll be a song at the end. I see a lot of friends over here. This is a truly interfaith collection. I see our Jewish friends over here, our Christian friends, our atheists, all of them. So this is a beautiful cross-section of Little Rock. Some of you might be familiar with Life Quest, perhaps. You know, Life Quest, yeah. So I was invited to do a little lecture on Life Quest. It was called Islam and Laws. And, for a physician who is not involved in law, I had actually asked you for a little help with the resources as well. I don't know if you remember.
Yes.
When I started the lecture and I was giving sort of a history of how Islamic law has evolved, or Islamic thought, legal thought has evolved, about 1/3 or 2/3 of the way, somebody stopped me and said, "Can you get to Sharia? Can you talk about Sharia? Let's talk about Sharia." I was like, okay, I'm just going to let this evolve, how it evolved, the thought process, and pre-colonial Islam, colonial Islam, post-colonial Islam. They said, no, but let's talk about Sharia instead, So I'm going to do the same thing to you. But it's important. For some of you may not know that Sharia literally means, if it's a desert society where it started, it literally means the path to the watering hole. And where you quench your spiritual thirst. Literally, Sharia means the path to where the water is. So I'm going to ask this a very broad question, but I want you to sort of see if you can crystallize some of the lessons from Muslims and progressive values, but also from a theological perspective, because MPV is couched in Islamic theology.
Yeah.
And then I think some of conservative Muslims may not realize that. It's not something new, but it's couched in Islamic theology. So, what does Sharia mean for Muslims? And what does Sharia mean for non-Muslims? And what does Sharia actually is? I mean, that's a 2-hour lecture, but if you crystallize your thoughts.
Well, I've actually
been able to describe this in a nutshell within like 1 minute on Sean Hannity by him. So I was like, Sean just let me, this one opportunity that I know I would never have again, so I just really took advantage of my time on that show. And basically, I would just say that, first of all, there's a difference in Sharia and Sharia law. These are two very different concepts. And Sharia, like Ali was saying, is basically the water we call that quenches your spiritual thirst. That's how it's described in the Quran. So Islam is a way of life. It's not a set of laws. And what has happened over the years is that after Prophet Muhammad passed away, the religious authorities and the political authorities of that time said, well, what do we do? How do we keep our people in check? I mean, what is the law? What is the rule? How do we ensure that they are Muslims? And so then, as a result of that, then there's the evolution of something called Sharia law. And so basically, it's a manifestation of medieval men reading the Quran and interpreting that as law. And in it also included the secular norms and societal norms of the day, such as child marriage. That's not in Islam. It's not permissible in the Quran, but it is practiced in a lot of Muslim societies. And so this is the manifestation of religious authorities in medieval times, and over the centuries it has evolved, and so it has become something called Sharia law. Sharia law is not God's law, but we as Muslims it has been ingrained from a young age that Sharia law is God's law, and that is the confusion. It's a confusion for Muslims, so let alone non-Muslims. And I really put a lot of blame on the religious authorities and our teachers and not deciphering the two concepts. And as a matter of fact, they conflate the two concepts easily, and they flip the words as if it's the same meaning. And that is actually the problem with it. And so the way we rebuttal this is very simple. If Sharia law is really God's law, why is it not the same in all the Muslim countries? For example, in Malaysia, the country of my birth, according to the Sharia court there, if a Muslim man wanted to marry wife number 2, he would have to ask permission of wife number 1, and the judge would actually go through his finances to make sure that he can actually afford wife number 2 and subsequent family along in the same standards as wife number 1. Now, we can talk about polygamy. That's another a whole 1-hour conversation right there. But then, in the last some years, the laws have changed. Now, the man doesn't even have to get the permission of wife number 1, and the judge basically signs a blank check. So what happened? God came down to this particular court in Malaysia and said, "Oh yeah, it's insane." And so the Sharia law on such rules is very different than Afghanistan, clearly, Saudi Arabia, Iran, etc., etc. So just by asking that simple question, well, if Sharia law is really God's law, why is it not uniform across the Muslim population and across all the Sharia courts in the Muslim world? Yeah.
And the other sort of parallel I see is the way the Muslim societies are evolving are more or less independent of each other. There's something to be said of the American Muslim culture, and you talk about that in your book as well. I lived in Britain for a little while, and there's a very different sort of British Muslim culture there, based on who went to Britain, who came to the United States, at what layers of immigration happened, the demographics, etc. How do you see the parallels of American Muslim thought and ethos evolving with, we've been here since day one.
Yeah.
Right? They try to sort of make it sound as if we're recent immigrants, but we've been here from day one, from before, right? And a third of the enslaved people who were brought to the United States were Muslims.
Yeah.
So the music, etc., was all usurped. But how do you see American Muslim thought and American Muslim ethos evolving? Do you see parallels in, the Reform Jewish Orthodoxy versus Reform Jewish evolution? And I, having had a Catholic education for 12 years, didn't even know what Baptists were before I came to the US. So when I see the diversity of thought within the Baptist tradition, the Protestant tradition,
Yeah.
do you see any parallels between the way these three Abrahamic cousins are evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. And the beautiful thing about being in America is that we have this liberty of freedom of information. And so we have access to a lot of textbooks that a lot of folks in the Muslim world do not have access to because the books are banned. So anything that is like progressive theology, progressive philosophies of Islam, those books are banned. And I actually write about that in my memoir too, because there are really a lot of free thinkers in the Arab world, but they will be jailed or they'll be killed. But throughout the centuries, progressive and philosophers have been killed throughout the centuries because it promoted freedom to think and freedom to express oneself, and that is taboo for an authoritarian regime or government, as we're starting to see that. So having a progressive Muslim philosopher and theologians over the centuries is not a new thing. And so for us as Muslims for progressive values, it's very simple, going back to these scholars of Islam, or even to the Quran itself, that is inherently progressive at its inception, and the way he promoted women's rights and so on and so forth. So for us, it's not a stretch to go back to the inherent progressive values and egalitarian values of Islam, and obviously how it's being manifested nowadays in the Western world, or even in the Muslim majority countries, is not really the I would say true to the spirit of Islam. And how Islam in America is evolving is, I can speak for our organization, I can't speak for other organizations in America, but it's very clear when you look at the Reform Judaism. And I referenced my rabbi friend in the book as well, and how he started the Reform elementary schools for the children of his synagogue, which is a very prominent Reform synagogue in Los Angeles. And he started this 50 years ago, all the way up to middle school, and then now they're closing down the school, and it's only providing Jewish Reform schooling for up to preschool. And then after that, the parents take them to public school or private schools. And so you can see where religion is going in America, and we can see that in the increase of the number of nuns, N-O-N-E-S, right? And so I think the younger generation of American Muslims are no different. And I can speak to this, and I can sort of almost forecast this, because I'll give a particular number. So we do a lot of interfaith marriages. That means that Muslims who are marrying non-Muslims, without the non-Muslim converting. And so this is not a particular way of marriage services that a lot of the traditional mosque and imams would provide. But for us, that is, forcing a non-Muslim to convert to Islam is inherently un-Islamic. It's very clear in the Quran, in chapter 2, verse 256, there is no compulsion in faith. It's in black and white. There's no ifs and buts about that. And so for us to demand a non-Muslim to convert to Islam for marriage is hypocritical. It's not sincere. It's not ikhlas. So we really provide the service for the Muslim who wants to marry outside the faith. And in the first quarter of last year, between January 1st and March 31st, we had 329 interfaith marriage inquiries in this first quarter. And obviously we didn't do all the 329, but these are couples that were interested, that were planning on marrying outside their faith. And so that is those numbers have increased exponentially over the years. I started this in 2007, and when we were doing a few interfaith marriages in a year, and now we're doing hundreds. And I'm not the only one that's doing. Now we have a whole roster of officiants that we have certified, as a Muslim organization. And so we can see the trajectory of where the Muslim population is going, and how are the kids going to be raised, and with how Islamic or not, or how interfaith intertwined are their children going to be. So we don't have those religious spaces that are inclusive. Whereas we see that in some of the Jewish temples, like constructionists, they're very, very much more, even more liberal, I think, than the Reform Judaism, as an example. And of course, Episcopalians, they are, you know, the most progressive, I think, of all the churches. You know.
So, you know, I've seen sort of the evolution of certain mosques in the U.S. Along different lines as well. This may be known to some of the non-Muslim friends that we have over here, but there's different flavors, or schools of thought of Islamic theology. Perhaps the most extreme, and please, you know, you're a religious leader as far as I can see you, correct me if any of this is incorrect, but Wahhabism or Salafism can be considered sort of the most restrictive or extreme in theological perspective. And that is, ironically, the flavor of Islam that has been imported into the United States, Britain, etc., for geopolitical reasons.
Yeah.
For geopolitical reasons. About 70% is the number that I think I heard you say at one point of Muslims find their spiritual satisfaction outside of mosques.
Yeah, 70%.
Yeah. You know, so, and there's this whole process of unmasking where people leave the faith and then, you know, come back or don't come back or become ex-Muslims, for example. How do you see the role of the American mosque evolving? Because there's Muslims of progressive values, which you foundedly, but there's other progressive groups that are sort of propping up and, you know, across the country. How do you see the role of the Muslim American mosque in the United States?
Yeah. So what has happened is that there are a lot of the unmosqued Muslims in America that have started creating their communities. And so they would call them, you know, they're not well endowed, and so they don't have established mosques. I mean, we don't have a physical space, we used to. But, so there's these pockets of communities that have popped up. There's in Seattle, in Texas, and also in New York that I know of that are open, they're very inclusive in their philosophy, very similar to Muslims for progressive values. I think at the end of the day, these particular communities are still trying to find their footing in the society. They're trying to find their footing in such a way that they don't step on the traditionalist mosques at the same time, right? To be respectful. Okay, well, you believe in a particular way of prayer or a particular way of the theology of Islam, you. And in Islam, we have these things like, you know, I go my way, you go your way. I mean, that's also in the Quran. So there's no enforcement of my Islam on you, at least in America. And so we try to be as respectful of the traditionalists or the conservatives, the Wahhabi, as we can, by just, you know, by just really focusing on how do we make ourselves better and how do we practice the Islam as we see it, without, you know, being critical of the more traditionalists. But the one thing that I am very critical about Wahhabism, and I do write about it because it has really impacted the Muslim world in the most negative way. And it's not just here in America or the West, it is really all over the Muslim world. And what I say is, I call it the cultural imperialism of Wahhabism. And if you go to Somalia, you go to Malaysia, for example, we used to wear very colorful batik attires, and now you see a lot of women wearing gray and beige colored galabeyas, you know, the robe. And in Somalia, for example, or in Ethiopia, you know, people used to wear very colorful attires in Africa, and now they're wearing black and, you know, with a niqab. That is not, that is what I call the cultural imperialism of Wahhabism. And in the mosque in the United States over the decades, whenever the immigrants have established mosques like the South Asians, you know, there were no wall partitions between the men and the women. And then what happened over the decades with the influence of Wahhabism, there's been walls, or women had to walk in from the back door, which, you know, for us in America is like, what? You know, that sounds really familiar. So there's a lot going on, there's a lot to unpack, and even like in the movie when the imam was looking for the witness, it says, hey, Shams, you're 18, right? You're 18 and above, right? And he's like, yeah. And what was the second question he asked?
Are you still a Muslim?
Oh, are you still Muslim? And he's like, yeah. And so he became the witness, and then it became an issue because then we find out that he's a trans, so that means that he's not really a man. And so that is also an aspect of Sharia law. And so those are the things that, not Sharia law. So these are some of the changes that we need to, as progressive Muslims, we are challenging that orthodoxy. So when we do our marriage services, we ask for 2 adults of sound mind. And it doesn't have to be, regardless of gender, race, sexuality, religion. That's it. And it should be that way. And so that's sort of how we are challenging, that is how we are creating our own progressive Islamic orthodoxy in America. Mm-hmm. And actually in several countries in Europe and in Canada as well. So we've had quite an international impact in how we created our spaces.
And I will use it as a segue to talk about one of the projects that I am really fascinated by, the Imam for She. You know, I would ask you to talk about that but I also would ask you if you have any questions that you would like to ask. You know, we have a mic over here that's available to you, and if you're on this side of any mobility issues, I can bring the mic to you as well. I can bring the mic right over. But so feel welcome to ask the next question. But
no question is too hard.
Yeah. So all the questions you were embarrassed to ask. Good. So coming back to the presence that Muslims of progressive values specifically has in other countries, the Imam for She project, and I, in my ignorance, just found out about that since I've been introduced to you through my friend Dr. Kevin Hefner, who helped organize all of this. So it's my ignorance as a Muslim also. But could you talk more about the Imam for She project and the roles that imams play here and abroad?
Sure. So Imams for She is a play on the United Nations women's UN Women, where they have the He for She campaign, and that was basically getting men and boys to also support women and girls' rights. And so what we did was we took that. Since I do a lot of advocacy work at the United Nations, I took that and I flipped it and made it into Imams for She. And what we do is we work with male imams in Muslim societies and communities, and we talk to them about positive masculinity and how they should use the Quran in affirming women and girls' rights, because obviously there's a lot of issues, particularly in the radicalized areas, in how women and girls are treated, how girls are prevented from attending school and subsequently high schools. And given the fact that there has been Islam is about emphasizing on education, and how in Medina, when the Prophet established the first Ummah, which was basically a secular state, where the tribes, the Jewish, Christian tribes, the pagan tribes, and whatever other tribes, they were all governed by their own religious laws. And so there was no imposition of Islamic law in any of these tribes in Medina. And collectively, they were known as Ummah. So when Muslims say, oh, Ummah, a lot of times this is another issue, is that they refer to the word Ummah as exclusively Muslim. And that is actually not true. And this is a problem because then it makes us exclusive. And no, we're part of society. Everyone is part of the Ummah. We are one humanity. So when in Medina, the first one he appointed to head the Department of Education was a woman. The Department of humanitarian needs was a woman, and he even appointed the first female imam, and that was really.
Waraka, she was quite
Waraka.
She led Muslim men
and women as well. And the thing about it is that they don't teach us these good things. They don't teach us this really remarkable history. They don't teach us the history about the covenant the Prophet had with Christian tribes and with Jewish tribes in protecting them, the places of worship, until the end of time, Why are we not taught these good things? And I learned this when I was 40 years old. So anyway, so there's so much good history in Islam and in Islamic history. And so we go to these imams that are very traditionally trained, and we share our perspective, our progressive theology with them. And a lot of them actually know about it, but they don't actually know how to preach it. And so we've developed a program in partnership with them. And so what are you comfortable in this very, very conservative society of yours? What are you comfortable preaching and teaching? And how would you like us to work with you in engaging to promote these egalitarian values? And so I've worked in Africa, Burundi, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda for the last 9 years. And last year I worked with in Afghanistan for a year. I did not go there. So, but we basically train these imams like what? These are the verses of the Quran. You guys know this. So this is how you teach and preach these verses of the Quran in the context of your society. And so then we talk about, well, what are the issues in your society? So I'll take a simple example. There are many mosques that preach about the right for men to beat their wives, the wife-beating verse, which is just such a bastardization of the verse. And so there's a lot of imams that promote that, and they promote like, oh, girls, there's no point educating your daughters, they need to be married off, right? That sort of mentality. And our imams do the opposite. It's just really lifting up the girls' rights and really liberating the women, and teaching and preaching about the women's right to economic empowerment, which is in the Quran. And so what we've started to see is that there has been such a magnet towards our imams, and now we have over 3,400 imams that are trained in these 3 countries. And I work in the most radicalized areas, and when I've gone to Burundi, we've had to have a military escort, just because there are some really radical imams that just want to do away with our imams. And so when I'm in town, they make sure that we have extra protection. And as a matter of fact, I've had to rescue one of our imams who was poisoned with arson. Yeah, arsenic. So that was quite an experience. I write about that in my memoir. So it's hard really to get into the weeds of the partners that we've had. They're very traditional imams, and yet, the difference between those imams and American imams is that my African imams, as in Africa, they will hug me. And I'm a hugger. So I love that about them. They're very sincere. And it's such a sincerity that makes sense. Like, if we're supposed to be brothers and sisters, there shouldn't be no issue about sexual attraction, kind of thing going on, right? So, because that's the reason why they don't shake your hands here, and they don't make eye contact here. I'm like, oh, come on.
So, there is a disconnection between the Muslim institutions, some of the big Muslim institutions, and the actual perception and the self-view of American Muslims.
Yeah.
There was a Pew research that you also cite in your book on the, not just LGBTQ rights, but generally progressive values among Muslims, how they are prevalent, and then that is in stark contrast with the Muslim institutions. Would you comment on that briefly? And then if anybody has a question, we'll take your question next.
Yeah, you better start lining up. Okay, so basically, Pew Research did a remarkable study on American Muslims. They did 3. It was one, obviously, after 9/11. It was in 2003, 2013, and 2017. And they asked the same questions. And one of the questions was, do you think Islam should be interpreted for the 21st century? And in the earlier years, in 2003, it was really in the single digits. And then by the time we came to 2017, it was 52%. Now, if you take that same question to the Muslim majority countries and Muslim societies, it is in the single digits, because they feel that the Quran is set, they've mixed up the Sharia law is set. Whereas American Muslims, who are critical thinkers, critical readers, educated, they have evolved in their understanding of Islam for themselves. The institutions don't really subscribe to that. The institutions are very much like the Muslim majority countries, where that no. It's like almost a state definition of Islam. No, this is how we do it, and that is it. And that is not how Islam is supposed to be interpreted. It even says that in the Quran, Islam is for all times, which means it has to be adapted according to the society and in the century you live in. So there really is a disconnect between the Muslim institutions, which are the minorities, and the Muslim population, which are, for the most part, very progressive. Their position on LGBTQ rights in 2017 was 57% of American Muslims support LGBTQ rights, but now it's over 70%.
Yeah.
And 69% of Muslim men who identify as Muslim find spiritual inspiration outside the mosque, and 70% of American Muslims feel the same way. But that was in 2017, so I imagine that the numbers are greater now.
Could I invite any of our audience members if they have any question in the meanwhile? Yes. Good to see you.
Thanks so much for organizing this. So I was really intrigued to hear.
Wait, the mic's on.
Is my mic on now? I think it is, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, talking? Thank you.
Yeah, that's on as well. Yeah.
Hello? Okay. So thank you so much. I was really intrigued to hear about the work you're doing in the continent of Africa and in Afghanistan. I wonder if you could talk about how you come to, your organization has come to be in those places. Was that an invitation? Like, how did that relationship start?
Yeah, they find me. And I think this is really, really important, because at the end of the day, the society themselves, I feel that they need to be self-empowered to want to do that change for themselves, whether there's money in it or not. I was talking to a parent earlier on, just before we started this program. I was saying, at the end of the day, your child needs to do what they feel they want to do. It has to come from within them. And it's the same way from a child to a society. They need to have that desire to change. And the imams that I work with, they are in the most rural areas, and the mosques are very, very tiny. They can probably fit in about 50 to 100 people at most. And I've prayed with them. And I really admire them so much, because they are really struggling to lift up their society. Clearly, the Wahhabism theology does not work for the advancement of their society. But what's really interesting, the way the Muslims have been left behind in these particular countries is because they're minorities. And this also harks back to colonialism as well. And I want to talk a little bit about that, how the legacy of colonialism in those countries have really affected the Muslim societies. So I'm talking to the Grand Mufti, and I go into details in this conversation in the book, but one of the Grand Mufti of Burundi, sadly he passed away. He was a big supporter of Imams Fashi. And having him endorse the program was a way for us to also be approved by the government of Burundi, because it's very, very authoritative. And so, I asked him, why is it that Burundi Muslims they tend to self-segregate themselves, and they have the marker of wearing hijab, their religious marker of wearing hijab, and why are the girls and women not as educated as the Christian population of Burundi? And so he said to me, well, at one time in Burundi, during the colonization by the Belgium, if you wanted to have an education, the only one that was available was the Catholic Church. And so if you wanted to attend that school, you had to change your name to a Christian name. And so he said, I renamed myself Philippe. And so a lot of Muslims don't want to do that. They are very proud of their Muslim heritage, and so they find themselves left behind because of education, and so therefore because of the lack of education, the less opportunities that they have to better themselves. And that's essentially why I work in those areas. And because we do a lot of work at the UN, I'm very visible. I'm also very accessible through social media, emails. I'm just trying to make the world a better place, that's it. And so when people reach out to me and they want to, I want to make my society better, I say, okay, well, let's have a conversation. And how do we do that together? But for me, what is really important is that what do you want to do? And what can I do to help facilitate that for you? So my job is basically sitting in Los Angeles, very privileged, is to actually just do grant writing and to just try to find the funds to bring and to basically give them the money to do it. And then whenever I speak at the UN or any international conferences, I always highlight those partners. Because it's not about me, it's about what they are doing to better their society. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm Annabelle Impertalk, a friend of
Annabelle?
Yes,
Yes.
Annabelle. And I'm Jewish. And what I was hearing you, and it was quite refreshing to me, I'm Reform. I probably would be Reconstructionist if we had a Reconstructionist congregation here. But I converted in 1987, years ago. I was raised as a Methodist. And what I'm hearing you say, and I've always wondered if this was going on in the Muslim world, which is what I call the Reformation. Like the Protestant Reformation, like in Judaism, the Reform movement. And what you're saying, at least from my, and I want to be sure I'm not misinterpreting, is that if you go back and read the text, kind of like a constitution, then you interpret that text within the context of what time you live. So in our Torah studies, we have great debates about whether the rabbis were a little off the mark, let's say. And we don't have any problem in criticizing the Middle Ages rabbis. And so commentary continues. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing this with us who are not Muslim, and we don't know what's going on internally in the Muslim community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the one issue is the one difference is that it's hard to actually be critical of the old theologians, the traditional theologians, and the way the hadiths and so on, because it's held up to a pedestal as if they were just saints, and they weren't. So I could be accused of being a blaspheme, right? So it's on video, but it is what it is. And it's the truth. And there's a lot of people that believe that, but they're afraid to say it. And I think we've come to the point where let's just cut out the harmful cultural practices that we've infused into religion of Islam. And let's just go back to the pure teachings. And let's create an American Islam that is really void of the harmful practices, the misogyny, the homophobic stuff, anything that is prejudice of others. Let's just go back to the purity of the theology and create a new culture, which is what I've been doing for 19 years, of an American Islam that really reflects that value. So as an example of that, when I lead prayer, I lead men and women in prayer. And the men in our community have no problem with me leading the prayer. They're not distracted by my body or any of that stuff, which is a lot of the justification why women are not allowed to lead prayer. And by the way, I have to say this. I saw a movie called The Conductor or something like that, and it was a woman, it was about the female conductor, how there's a lack of female conductors. You know why? Because our backs are to the audience. And so that's why for the longest time, we did not have female conductors. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the same ridiculous justification we have for leading prayer. Anyway, I had to just insert that in there. But so that to as an example, so when I lead prayer, I usually have a man do the call for prayer, and if we have a man doing leading the prayer, we do have a woman doing the call for prayer. So it's not to push women only, it's to be more egalitarian. So we're very clear about that. We're not promoting matriarchy as a better way of, as a better substitute for patriarchy. No, that's not what we're doing. So, so before I lead prayer, for example, I say, you know, this is a space where we are all spiritual equals, and you can stand wherever you're comfortable. Families can pray together in the center. If you're not comfortable, men on one side, women on one side, on the other side. And for trans people, you stand where you feel you can be yourself. And that way, by verbalizing that, we have created a new orthodoxy for ourselves in the spiritual space and how we conduct our prayers. So that's just one example. And another example that I've also learned over the years is, and it was one of the reasons why I started Muslims for Progressive Values, was the lack of respect for the woman's voice. And it always starts with a voice, and then it becomes your thought, your skin, your, you know, whatever else, your being. And here in America, so I was in the music business for more than 20 years, and you know, I've had more than 40 songs published and awards and stuff like that. And so when 9/11 happened, I decided to do an Islamic pop CD as a way to insert my a female Muslim voice, and from an artistic perspective, because what we were all hearing was war was uber, you know, toxic masculinity. I think we all remember that, right? So I did an Islamic pop CD called On My Wake Up, and I didn't realize what I was doing, because the way I was raised in my Malay culture, there was no taboo on music. We had music, and in a lot of Muslim cultures, we always have music in a spiritual, celebrative manner. But somehow that is missing in the United States. In the traditional Sunni, I can't speak for Shia, I'm not an expert in Shiaism. And so I was discriminated because I was a female Muslim singer. And so then I decided, well, this is unacceptable. I'm going to start MPV and find my people, my kind of Muslim, right? The kind of Muslim Islam I was raised on. And so that has evolved into MPV. And what I also noticed is that there's this lack of love for the arts, or expression and support of the arts, which I think is such a it is what we are as human beings. It's what makes us distinctive from the animal kingdom, is our creativity. And I use this as an example of why I'm a Muslim, and I'm also very, I express my Islam through the arts. So when we were a fetus, okay, let's backtrack a little bit. Okay, I think we can all agree that God is the most created entity, right? Look at the universe. And then when we were a fetus in the womb, God blows His spirit into all of us, regardless of what religion you are, atheist, whatever you are. And so we all have that creative soul, that creative spirit in us, right? And so why is it that that is being deprived, or that is being curtailed in the name of Islam? You're killing our spirituality when you curtail our creative spirit. And so that's how I look at it. And so what we started doing is, this being the example, the film being an example of us as an organization supporting the arts, resuscitating the support of the arts, and how that brings a different perspective of Islam or spirituality or secularism, whatever that message is that is coming from a Muslim perspective in lifting up our collective humanity. And so it's not about being Muslim, it's about how do we, as Muslim, lift up everyone's humanity. And that's a very different perspective from traditional mosques. Is that good? Okay.
So I think we have the last two questions here back, and then after that I would ask the audience to stay for a song that Annie's going to sing for us, and we'll adjourn right after that. So this is the last two questions. Here you go.
Hi, my name is Hannah.
Sorry, can you stand up because I can't see you? Oh, okay.
Hello, thank you very much for coming in this nasty weather and
Thank you for coming out. I
spread the
appreciate
light
it.
on your face of Islam that is not the most known. I just want to say I was raised in a very open-minded Muslim family. This is why I ended marrying a Christian man. And I have 3 children. When they were young, they used to ask me, Mom, what are we? I said to them, for now, our family is a Muslim, Christian, Jewish family. When you are 18, you can pick the religion that you want. I wanted them absolutely to feel that any religion is a part of them. Of course, we don't have any Jewish person in our family, but I invented that. I told them my mom is actually a Jewish woman, and she had no way to correct me, so for a long time I thought really that my mom is Jewish. Anyway, I was wondering, you mentioned many times the Wahhabi version of Islam. I don't know if everybody knows, but the Wahhabi version was born in Saudi Arabia 300 years ago, and it's actually the most strict, anti-progressive, conservative version of Islam, because I believe every religion has several versions, Anyway, and the influence of this version of Islam went way beyond Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, like I said, it's gone into Malaysia and how it's influenced all our cultures, yeah.
Sure. I mean, seeing what's going now in Saudi Arabia and the way that we're trying to get rid of this version of Islam inside Saudi Arabia, at least that's what the authority claims and what we see to a certain degree. Did you feel that this changes are felt beyond Saudi Arabia? I know during Fahd, the King Fahd, I think he opened, I don't know, thousands of mosques everywhere in Africa, in France, in Europe, and of course all these mosques were teaching the Wahhabi version. What do you think is going now in this area of the world?
Sure. Yeah, I write quite extensively about Wahhabism in my book, and I don't think that it's going to change much in our society, not for another generation or two, because the damage has been done. So I look at my family. My family, the way I was raised, was very egalitarian, very open-minded, the Islam of old. And so it's this Wahhabism that has been prominent in the last, I would say, 30 years, has really taken over the definition of what Islam is. It has become the norm in Muslim societies across the world. And so, except for Iran and obviously the Shia societies in the world. However, the poisoning, and if I look at my family itself, we have a few that are still progressive-minded, but for the most part, a lot of them have become very Wahhabi in their worldview, and that includes the misogynistic worldview and the prejudices against anyone that is not Muslim. It is really, really problematic, and it's really sad to see such a negative and harmful impact this particular interpretation has done to the world, not just to the Muslim society, but to the world. And so the fact that, MBS, the prince, wakes up one day and he says, oh, you know what? It's not compulsory for you to wear a hijab. I was like, oh, hallelujah. And so all of a sudden you have this one guy who wakes up and says that, okay, no more requirement for women to wear hijab or niqab. So I just came back from Umrah in December. I didn't have to wear, it wasn't, most of the time I was without a hijab, and nobody blinked. And unless, of course, when I went to do the ritual part, I covered myself, my hair. But for the most part, it was, the revealing of the hair was not a big deal. But when you go back to Malaysia, for example, there's still a very strong social pressure for you to wear the hijab. And that's not going to let up for probably another generation at the minimum. But for that whole society to change, it's going to be very difficult because it's become a political Islam. And so Islam is not defined by your individual right to how you interpret your religion. It's a political definition of Islam. Turkey has its own, Malaysia has its own, Indonesia has its own, every country has its own version of Islam. And if you don't adhere to that, you will be jailed, you'll be fined, you will, depending on what that Sharia law is. So, full circle. And so so I don't see it changing anytime soon, but I think it's the next generation that's going to have to challenge. But the numbers are too, in the Muslim countries, particularly in the Middle East, a lot of youth are leaving Islam. They've become agnostic or atheists. And so, by the way, you should also know, since you are in a mixed marriage, that I have developed with an early childhood expert on a progressive Islam curriculum for children that is inclusive of different faith traditions, that doesn't demonize other faith traditions, but shares the commonality, but it is still rooted in Islam, but is inclusive, just so you know.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, thank you for all the information that you gave, but my question was about actually the political and financial support to this kind of version of Islam, because I know that the change in the mind is going to take generation. I was talking about, because as you said, Islam has been political from the beginning and continues to be political, so.
Okay, so here in the United States, mosques do not accept funding from Saudi Arabia or any foreign funding. That's a law. So that started after 9/11. So as far as the United States that's concerned, that is off the table. Now they may be a roundabout way, I don't know. But in Europe, that's also starting to change. So for example, in Germany, they have started having laws against foreign funding as well. However, you still have a large population of Turkish Germans. And so Erdogan does have an influence in the Turkish Muslim population in Germany. And in France, they've really clamped down on the funding and where the funding comes from, etc. And I know the EU, and I have friends in Europe, as an example, who have started this move to train European imams in the context of Europe. And so there's also that going on. And then we also have quite a network of Muslim women imams in Europe. And we had our first Muslim women imam conference in Brussels 2 years ago. So there's a lot of change going on, but I really do challenge also not just our American government, but also European governments who are really hypocritical when it comes to this. They talk a good talk, particularly Europeans, when it comes to about women's rights, freedom of religion and belief, and all that good stuff. But then when it comes to politics, they support the very dictatorships that oppress the freedom of expression of the lay Muslims who do not want these authoritarians, who want the freedom to practice their religion, however, etc., etc. So the hypocrisy there is really stark, and I write about that in my book too, and I call it out. So yeah.
Thank you.
One more, sorry.
Sure.
I'm a very different Muslim. I see in your book that your father recommended that you come to the University of Arkansas.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay, because it makes sense. You declined because of what you would probably imagine is the bigoted nature in this part of the country. And I'm wondering what we can do to help reduce the bigotry that I've actually witnessed being with my friend towards Muslims, especially hijabis, and others who are outwardly, visibly Muslim, and they get discriminated against. What can we do about that?
You gotta talk to your churches. and your religious institutions, your synagogues, It's not something that we as Muslims can do. We can talk about progressive Islam until we're blue in the face. We can stand in the streets every day. I remember when ISIS was rampant. We can talk about it. It doesn't matter what we Muslims say almost. It's really up to you to change the society from within you, just as it's up to me and the Muslims to change the mindsets of the Muslim mindset. It's, we all have to do our bit in our society. And I think one way is that when the video is up, you can share that with your community, and you all can share that with your community. And it's a conversation. We can continue to have that conversation. And the one thing that I was speaking to a human rights defender in India, and she's an elderly woman. She's been doing human rights for decades. And she was sharing this story about how India has gotten so far behind, so radical in their Hindutva, which is their Hindu supremacist ideology. So sad how everything is so supremacist in our respective fields now. And she was saying that even the large civil society organizations in India do not dare to speak up against Modi, the president, and his policies on his oppression of Muslims, his oppression of Christians and Sikhs and so on. And so it's come to the point where the stereotypes about Muslims in India is so crazy. So she started a new initiative. She said, you know what? It has to change on an individual level. So she did this effort where she invited 10 well-to-do Hindu women to go visit 10 Muslim women homes and have a conversation over chai, over tea. And what was their response after that? All the Hindu women said, oh, they only have one wife. They only have 2 children, most 3. They don't have multiple wives and so the stereotypes about Muslims and Islam is so off the chart and rampant, and the only way to change it is by human one-on-one connection, and for you to also take the message to your respective institutions, learning centers, grassroots organizations, and I am always available to come and speak.
Yes. And chai changes everything.
Yeah, chai.
And gatherings like this. So we will save the applause for after the song, if that's okay with you. I really enjoyed. I'm seeing very beautiful faces, my friends over here, so that gives me joy. It gives me joy to host such a brilliant mind and to talk about really sort of, not dirty laundry, but it's stuff that the dynamics of each society that other societies may not be familiar with. So I'll ask John to set us up for the song, and then we'll save our applause to the end, after the end of the song.
Yeah, so before you hit music, I want to speak a little bit about the song. So the song I'm going to sing is, the lyrics is written by a female Muslim saint in the 700s, and her name is Rabia al-Basri. And she's an amazing poet and a very, obviously, saintly figure in the time. So you imagine Iraq, Basra, in the 700s, a female Muslim saint. Now, it's crazy, but that's what it was. And so what I did was I went to my classical roots, and I did the composition, the classical genre, and then I incorporated her lyrics, and here's the song. And this is called In My Soul, and I'm singing this because I know it's an interfaith audience, and she talks about, in my soul there is a temple, a shrine, a mosque where no walls exist. You're welcome to videotape it, and you can tag me on Zonneveld on social media, and so please, John, please play. Where no wall Thank you, my friend. And so much to Kevin and Gabor. And so we have books, and if you already have books, I'm happy to sign them. And then I know we don't have enough, and we invite you to visit Gabor's.
Yes, so Garbo's Pyramid Books Gallery and Framing. And I think she's here still, so she can. There you are. Outside, I think she's outside. And we can see if they can give you a contact. You can go collect your book for free over there. And everybody stay warm. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.